Here in the United Kingdom, as we do across the world.
Let us make a resolution. Let us make this resolution to promote the message of peace and brotherhood, which is your message to mankind, that people of different religions should not quarrel and fight with each other, but should accept and tolerate and live together in that spirit of brotherhood and peace, which is the essence of your religion. Love for all, hatred for none.
That's right, Mirza Masroor Ahmed is the present head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, the most dynamic international community within Islam. The community was established by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmed in Qadian, a small and remote village in India. He claimed to be the expected reformer of the latter days, the one awaited by all major world religions. Founded in 1889, the community has continued to spread throughout the world, flourishing under Caliphate, the system of spiritual leadership established after the demise of the Holy Founder. The current successor of this movement, Hazrat Masroor Ahmed, continues the work of the Holy Founder to revive the spiritual and moral state of mankind. The movement embodies the benevolent message of Islam in its pristine purity, a movement that preaches peace, universal brotherhood, and submission to the will of God. Ahmadi Muslims have earned the distinction and reputation of being a law-abiding and peaceful community. Within a century, the movement has reached all the corners of the earth and has been recognized and praised by the global community.
Love for all, hatred for none. Those words from your third Khalifa are more important, more crucial, more essential today than they have ever been. And of course the Ahmadi have always practiced this peace-loving philosophy.
I am gladdened and inspired by the fact that the Ahmadis not only preach a message of love, friendship and understanding, but practice it fully in the way you
and to hate none is the avowed guiding principle of the Ahmadi life.
I would thank you also that you have stressed the importance of showing that Islam is the religion of peace, not the religion of hate, as it was stated on the wall in the AMSA. Love for all, hatred for none. I think that is the message that the world really needs.
That promoting religious freedom is an essential building block for peace and stability here and throughout the world. In this we are allied with His Holiness, a courageous champion of religious freedom and of peace.
Love for all, hatred for none is the message that we see in this mosque and from the Ahmadiyya Association. Your people have been the leaders in taking the peace movement that one step further.
The huge respect we all have, for your work, day by day, in making a reality of peace and brotherhood across the communities in this country and across the world.
Wherever the movement has been established, it endeavors to exert a constructive influence of Islam through social projects, educational institutes, health services, Islamic publications.
I would like to pay an additional tribute to the work being done by Ahmadis in raising standards in Africa and particularly in education.
Yes, Britain has welcomed the headquarters of the Ahmadis in this country, but it hasn't become something that's become, as it were, a closed sect in Britain. It's become a community that has sought to reach out borders. And that's very important, because the best way to break down the barriers of misunderstanding and prejudice is for that contact to happen, and I thank you for that.
The Ahmadiyya community contributes hugely to interfaith forums, to the richness of our community, and that is the same that's reflected across our nation. But what I would like to pay tribute to you as well this evening is the contribution that you make to wider society and the important charitable causes that you support, not just for your own communities, but for the wider communities. And that is to be acclaimed and that is to be applauded.
Your faith is dedicated to serving the society that you live in, and from what I've seen, heard and experienced from mainstream charities, schools and churches, your faith and community have contributed in significant ways. I have personally experienced and heard that you have raised tens of thousands of pounds on sponsored walks for children, older people and people with disabilities. You have dedicated yourselves to charitable social projects, and most significantly of all, you have not distinguished between faiths, ethnicities or communities.
The community's many social projects aimed at helping those in need bears testimony to humanitarian concerns in respect of all human beings, regardless of race, colour or creed.
The Ahmadiyyan community have an extraordinary reputation abroad for charitable work in Africa, India, Bosnia and Indonesia, amongst other places. But your community here too have an extraordinary reputation. You have been generous with your time and resources, and you have made yourselves part of the wider community.
The Ahmadiyya community has always been at the forefront, not only of helping their own, but actually helping within society as a whole, is one of the reasons why, if I may say to you, your presence in this country has been so beneficial to us.
In the past 100 years, you have given so much to the society in the United Kingdom and to societies everywhere globally. You are among those who give and do not only take. You give so much to so many societies that I have seen and felt and listened to at work.
Ahmadis are also renowned for working to serve the greater good through social, health, and educational initiatives as well as mosque projects.
Your own work, Your Holiness, particularly in West Africa, is well known, and we heard just now about your attempts to bring water and energy supplies to some of the poorest communities in West Africa.
Together, we should fight common hunger and poverty.
Before we begin the event, we have pizzas for everyone, so please grab slices and settle yourself. So the next 5-10 minutes will be this for It's better you grab the pizzas now. The event will be about for 2 hours, so humble suggestion, eat, and we'll have a nice time this evening.
Pizza's not going to eat itself.
Mic test 1 2. Mic test 1 2. Mic test 1 2. Mic test 1 2. Mic test 1 2.
Structures in place towards the fight against these common enemies in order to enhance the dignity of man.
The mission has been a vanguard and a partner in collaborating with government in the areas of education, health, agriculture, and human animation.
My community and mission in Sierra Leone really made a pivotal contribution to the education. Do you just have to look around wherever you are?
And I have to say, Your Holiness, that I was touched by the way in which your predecessor as spiritual leader instructed your community, the Amadei community, to befriend and look after those suffering as a result of the Bosnian conflict, and I was very impressed by that.
Everywhere that mankind suffers, your members have been active in bringing help and saving lives and limbs.
For me, as a student of Islam for now almost 30 years, I'm constantly amazed by the depth of service that is certainly represented by this community and tradition, by the depth of tolerance and the constant searching for what it means to be human. To be a human means to be of service, and I think this is so dramatically represented by the message of this community.
All of us, whatever our political persuasions, hugely admire the work of the Ahmadiyya community here in the United Kingdom, as we do across the world.
Let us make a resolution. Let us make this resolution to promote the message of peace and brotherhood, which is your message to mankind, that people of different religions should not quarrel and fight with each other, but should accept and tolerate and live together in that spirit of brotherhood and peace, which is the essence of your religion. Love for all, hatred for none.
That's right, Mirza. Majroor Ahmed is the present head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, the most dynamic international community.
जगह आराम से मैगी दी जगह मैगी दी आराम से
Test 1, 2. Let's start the program. We'll begin with scripture readings.
Peace be upon you all. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى. يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. I present the English translation of the verses from the Holy Quran, chapter 59, verse 23 to 25. He is Allah and there is no God beside Him, the knower of the unseen and the seen. He is the gracious, the merciful. He is Allah and there is no God beside Him, the sovereign, the holy one, the source of peace, the bestower of security, the protector, the mighty, the subduer, the exalted. Holy is Allah, far above that which they associate with Him. He is Allah, the Creator, the Maker, the Fashioner. His are the most beautiful names. All that is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Him, and He is the mighty, the wise.
I would like to call Mr. Sander Miller.
The Babelfish Argument for the Non-Existence of God by Douglas Adams from his book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Babelfish is a small, yellow, leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on the brainwave energy received not from its own carrier, but from those around it. It absorbs all the unconscious mental frequencies from the brainwave energy to nurture self, which it then excretes into its mind of the carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thoughts frequencies of the nerve signals packed up from the speech center of the brain which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all of this is that if you stick a Babelfish in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix which has been fed into your mind by the Babelfish. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as the final clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this. I refuse to prove that God exists, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, said man, the babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It couldn't have evolved by a chance. It proves you exist, and therefore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. Oh dear, says God. I hadn't thought of that, and promptly vanishes in a puff of logic. Oh, that was easy, says man. And for an encore, goes on to prove that black is white and gets killed at the next zebra crossing. Most leading theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingo skindies. But that didn't stop Olan Klupin from making a small fortune when he used it as the central theme of his best-selling book. Well, that about wraps it up for God. Meanwhile, the poor babblefish, by effectively removing all barriers of communication between different races and cultures, has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation.
In the name of Allah, the gracious, ever merciful, all distinguished guests. Sorry. My apologies. We'll have a Bible scripture reading by Reverend Gregor Scadden, please.
Reading from the Gospel of Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. The word of the Lord.
In the name of Allah, the gracious, ever merciful, all distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hamza Khan, and I'm serving as the president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association here at Carleton University. I welcome you all to our annual Interfaith Symposium. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is a religious organization, international in its scope. With members in over 212 countries, it is a dynamic denomination of Islam with worldwide membership exceeding tens of millions. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community was established in 1889 by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, in a small and remote village, Qadian, India. He claimed to be the reformer of the latter days, the awaited one of the world community of religions, the Mahdi and Messiah. The community is an embodiment of the benevolent message of Islam: peace, universal brotherhood, and submission to the will of God in its pristine purity. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Islam was created under divine guidance with the objective to rejuvenate Islamic, moral, and spiritual values. Wherever the community is established, it endeavors to exert a constructive influence of Islam through social projects, educational institutes, health services, and interfaith dialogues. It advocates peace, tolerance, love, and understanding among followers of different faiths. It strongly rejects violence and terrorism in any form and for any reason. Ahmadiyya Muslim community has been holding many interfaith symposiums and conferences across Canada. The community firmly believes and always promotes its famous slogan, "Love for all, hatred for none." I would like to recognize a few people from the audience. We have among us Mr. Abdul Wahab Al-Haimi, who is running for Board of Governors at Carleton. We also have Reverend Eric Lucas of Carleton Memorial United Church. Now we shall be beginning with our speech sessions. I would like to call on stage Dr. Richard Mann, who will be moderating this event. He is the Associate Dean of Curriculum, Programs and Planning. In this role, he assists units in planning their curricular and program changes, often with an eye towards developing plans to improve retention and student experience at undergraduate level. As a faculty member in the College of the Humanities in the Religion program, Dr. Richard teaches courses in South Asian studies and religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. His research focuses on two diverse areas. The first is the history of the Shaiva tradition in textual sources and material history, particularly in relation to traditions of Skanda Kartikeya. The second is the more recent history of the Sikh tradition in India and in the diaspora community in Canada, with a focus on media representations of the community. Please help me welcome Dr. Richard Mann on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So my role will be to introduce the speakers. Each speaker has about 12 to 15 minutes. So if you see me running back on the stage, bring this in front of the speaker. It's to tell them how much time they have. We do have time for questions, but there'll be a question period at the end of the sessions. So if you have questions, save them to the end, and then we'll have an open time for questions and answers then. So first, I get to introduce Reverend Gregor Snedden. Gregor serves as rector of St. Matthew's Anglican Church in the Diocese of Ottawa. He is the chair of Liturgy Canada, as well as a council member of Associated Parishes for Liturgy and Mission, and a representative of the Canadian province with the International Anglican Liturgical Consultation. He is the founding coordinator of Contemplative Outreach Eastern Ontario. First and foremost, he is a dad and a husband and likes to play the blues.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, shalom. It's so beautiful, and we're so blessed to be in this wonderful country and to have these kinds of events where we can share together with one another in relationship. It reminded me that, I don't know if you heard the story, but a couple of years ago there was a fellow who was, it was right in the new year, it was a beautiful sunny day, and he was out jogging out behind the Parliament buildings, and he was getting a quit smoking or something, you know, and he was quite encouraged, and he was jumping up from turret to turret. I don't know if you've ever been back there on the wall, when he slipped and fell. And as he was sliding down the edge of the cliff, he just managed to grab onto this tree root, and he was hanging there going, "Help, help, somebody help me." And he heard this voice, and he said, "It is I, God, the God of your ancestors, of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Let go of that tree root and all things shall be well." The guy hanging there, and he looked down, and he says, "Is there anybody else?" Sometimes to understand something, we're called and invited to let go, and our best reasoning capacities aren't able to help us get to the destination where we think we're being called or grasped towards. I remember years ago I was presiding at a wedding, and after the wedding I had the father of the bride come up and corner me at the reception, telling me all the terrible things about religion and how rotten God was to the thought of God, and the religion was just a foolish gambit and so on. Went to tell me that he just didn't believe in God, and I said, well, neither do I. And then I left him. I could see he was really perplexed by this. The man of the cloth who married his daughter, denying God. He was trying to corner me again all through the reception, and I kept on trying to avoid him until the very end. And he said, how can you say that? You're wearing a collar, you don't believe in God. I said, well, I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. I think there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about what we mean by this word God, and I think really, as I was sharing with Xander before we began, I think this question is a very awkward and difficult question, really, to ask at all. Is God fact or fiction? A question like that, first, I think we need to arrive on, well, what do we mean by those three words? What do we mean by fact, fiction, and most of all, what do we mean by God? What's our definition that we're going to try to prove or disprove? In many ways, just purely by definition from a Christian perspective, and I speak from a Catholic or Anglican background, also Eastern Orthodox formation, is that God by definition is certainly no fact. God cannot be a fact because God does not exist within anything that we can possibly say, talk of, or speak of. In the Upanishads, the definition for God is thou before whom all words recoil. And in the Catholic Catechism, it reads, anything you can say about God, God is certainly not that. So God is ultimate mystery. And because of the understanding of God and the particular nature of a human being, to preserve God's absolute free will, God is outside of all creation and anything we could possibly say about God. So anything you can say factually about God, we would say, well, God is not that. And also a fiction. Well, I would have to say that there is a lot of talk about God that I would think of as just purely fiction. I remember I sadly had to bury a woman who had converted to Christianity by some group and thought that the second coming was imminent, and she jumped off her building, leaving her son and husband behind. Surely that God is fiction. And a lot of the things we hear on TV and on the news, or the way several people, even many, many people who call themselves Christian, I think would be, in my view, would be speaking in a fictitious manner. But then there is some fiction that is very powerful and is very, if you ever read any C.S. Lewis, any C.S. Lewis fans out there, some wonderful material there. So I wonder if maybe the question is better, is God true? Or what is truth? Rather than fact or fiction. When I was a child, we had a little fenced-in backyard and a little porch. And we were, as children at the age of 4, we were allowed to play on the back porch. But we couldn't step off the porch onto the grass in the backyard. My mother could watch us there. When we got a little older, like maybe 5 or 6, we could go play out in the backyard, no problem. But we couldn't pass the gate to go into the front yard where my mom couldn't see. And then there was a road out there. But then when I was 7 or so, well, we could go play in the front yard too. We couldn't cross the street. And when I got a little older than that, I could cross the street and go to my friend's house. I could go up to Marivale Road, but I couldn't cross Marivale Road, nor could I cross the train tracks. But each one of those rules, or each one of those descriptions, was there to serve me and my capacity to experience and perceive reality. At 4 years old, I couldn't understand why I couldn't play on the road. And I could not understand the awareness of the 10-year-old boys playing on the street. Why wasn't I allowed to play on the street? I could not perceive their awareness. So each level of each one of those fences was there to serve me in my experience of life and of consciousness. That's a great way of understanding, I think, rules that are applied, but it's also a way of understanding how we exist and who we are. Every one of those rules is true. Every one of those rules is true, and one of those descriptions is true. Thou shalt not play on the front lawn. It's true, but it's foolish at the age of almost 50 for my mother to say you can't play outside the front lawn, can't you? So questions about God are very difficult to address. Surely we could take the example of a Sunday school God or the God like Santa Claus and create some great arguments like some folks like Richard Dawkins, who you may have heard of, and I guess he's really met his match. But each one of those stages, every one of those encounters or experiences of God calls for a different dialogue and way of speaking. The thing about trying to define God as a fact or as an object among other objects, like this, is this a fact, this table, or this chair, this timing phone here? Is God just another object among many? Well, we would again say by definition, no, we cannot talk about God in that kind of language. We also, I don't think, can talk about God and try to prove the existence of God by our scriptures. That's like saying you have to believe in God because it says so in the book he wrote. I don't know if you catch the little leap in logic there. Scriptures can certainly be used for those of us who belong to our traditions to encounter and experience a living God, but it's difficult to use them in a way to try and speak to others about the existence of God. First and foremost, I would suggest that God is an experience. It's something that we experience. Now, science will also try to show us that anything is experience. Empirical science comes from the Greek empiria rather. It's about the measurement of experience, and the experience should be public and repeatable, and that's how we get to an objective fact, a repeatable truth. But that is not that same apparatus of measuring experience cannot be applied, I would suggest, to an experience of God, because God is a subjective experience. It's not quantifiable in such a way. Oftentimes we'll have experiences like the great materialists who offer so much to our thought, Dennett, for example, and the exploration of consciousness and being, often can use a reductionist model to reduce things to their parts, to give a description of reality. So that beautiful sunset that we saw when we came in here today could be described as, well, it's really just atoms and so on. It's reduced, it has an aesthetic value, but it's really just a reduction of its parts. But the experience of what we call God or divine is something that reaches beyond that. The Bach cello suites, for example, is not about catgut strings and horsehair twining on them, making some type of sound or vibration. The music that is produced is something far beyond those tiny parts that make it up. Remember Stephen Hawking, he once wrote, "The human race is just a chemical scum on an average-sized planet orbiting round a very average-sized star in the outer orbit of one of a million galaxies." Is that fact or fiction? Well, in some ways it's kind of factual, isn't it? But the invitation from a Christian perspective would suggest that you cannot ask the question about what is God without asking the question, well, who am I? What is a person? Science does not even have a definition for person. Person is a mystery. You are a mystery. We cannot talk about God without asking, who am I? What is a person? What is consciousness? What is consciousness? What is beauty? What is the experience you have of observing and engaging with a sunset? Beauty is something that calls us out of ourselves, beyond ourselves, something that is ungraspable. And we experience also ourselves as people in the same way. We live according to other. For me to be a self, I need you. I need thou. I need the other. I exist only in relationship. For example, how can you prove love? Is it fact or is it fiction? Is it merely a biological engagement with something that you could describe or measure? Or is it something beyond what we can quantify in such a way? That's why one of our scriptures would say, God is love. God is love. God is mystery. God is love. And God is relationship. The Christian church, you know, it did not grow in its early centuries by entertaining worship services. It grew by the witness of the people that were being changed by engaging in this relationship with this great mystery, thou. In the early Hellenistic world, it would be very common if you gave birth to a daughter or to a handicapped child to leave them on the side of the road. It was out of the experience of the risen and crucified Christ, the experience of the beauty of this holy other, that Christians adopted en masse discarded children and handicapped people. They were known by these huge families. Today is the feast of Perpetua and her companions, who were fed to wild beasts and miraculously survived, and then were each in turn executed by the sword. Fact or fiction? Well, it's certainly factual. That's a historical event that this happened. But is it fiction about the encounter of crucified love, of the profound love of the holy other that inspired and indwelt these people to live into a certain way of life and being? So I would suggest to you that this question, God, fact, or fiction, is a difficult question to lay before us and try to quantify in some way. The way I would suggest to you to experience God is to hold yourself before beauty and empty yourself towards the other, and open your hearts to the fullness of personal, holistic encounter with the wholeness of being. And that's where we can begin a conversation about engaging and meeting the holiness of this mysterious word we call God. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next, Xander Miller. Come on up, Xander. Xander is a secular humanist, an advocate for freedom of thought and freedom of speech. Xander was a founding member of Ottawa Skeptics and CFI Ottawa. Xander has degrees in philosophy and cognitive science. In 2007, Xander came back from Japan to be a new atheism activist. In 2013, Xander observed the emergence of religious sects within the atheist movement. This led him to have a crisis of faith in his new atheism. Xander used this as an opportunity to rebuild both his knowledge of faith from first principles. Xander works as a web developer and practices Soka Gakkai Buddhism. Xander currently organizes the Ottawa Maps of Meaning Meetup, which focuses on self-improvement, psychology, and the practical aspects of religion and mythology. Please join me in welcoming Xander.
My name is Xander Miller. I'm a secular humanist. I'm also a father, a husband, a human being. I am also, as far as objective reality goes, an atheist. The panel discussion tonight is on the topic of God, fact, or fiction. My fellow illustrious panelists are going to argue that God is fact, so I'm here to represent as best I can the argument that God is fiction. God is fiction. To start, I'm going to skip the God part, put it aside, come back to it later, because God is rather complicated. Instead, I'm going to focus on the fiction part. Fiction gets a bad rap these post-Enlightenment days. People say something is fiction in a dismissive way, as if only facts matter. This is extremely wrong-headed. Fiction is essential to the human condition in a way facts are not. Take television and books, for example. People do not spend their free time reading spreadsheets of precipitation data on television. Television is full of fictional stories and fictionalized stories. Why these days it even seems people like their news fictionalized. Now that we don't need fact-filled telephone books to look up phone numbers, they don't print them anymore. On the other hand, there is still demand for reprints of the works of fiction like Alice in Wonderland, Spider-Man comics, and Harry Potter. Video games and movies are $100 billion industries, and they provide fictions, not facts. Fiction should not be dismissed out of hand. So when I say God is fiction, when I say religion is fiction, understand that I am in no way being dismissive. Our brains need fiction to make sense of the world. This is why our brains so readily synthesize fictions. This is why we spend so much time and money seeking out and trading the best stories. We need fictions to make sense of things. God is supposed to guide us. Religion helps us navigate the world, understand how we live. The best way to do this is with fiction, with stories. Holy books need to be filled with stories, as they are, not tables of data. Fiction is essential to the conscious mind, human mind, as food and water are to the physical body. Leave the facts to science. That's what science is good at. That's why the Enlightenment was necessary. Religion has provided us with the fiction we require, but the growth of our society was hampered by the absence of facts. Religion is not about facts and objective reality. No one is going to attempt to prove the fact of God today by showing us a Google satellite photo of heaven. The scientific method is only a few hundred years old. The scientific method is powerful precisely because it suppresses our natural religious thinking. The scientific method allows us to momently suppress our obsession with God and see the world as it is. It allows us to see facts we would otherwise be blinded to. This is how science has helped us improve our society, provided us with an abundance we had never known before, miracles on earth. Science allows us to turn down the fiction and see the facts. But we still need to attend to our fiction, to turn the fiction back up again when the day's science is done. Our fictions, God and religion, are still vitally important and must be attended to. So why is fiction so important? Take as a thought experiment the experience of a newborn child first entering the world. Imagine you were that child. How would you describe your world? Is it a world filled with facts? Or is it a world that you are using fictions to try and make sense of? It is closer to that latter, in my opinion. And that experience of that newborn child is actually much like our own experiences. We're all finite beings dealing with a universe of infinite potential. There's always far more that we don't know than we do know. And the world is changing minute by minute, dynamically. We can't deal with an environment like that on facts alone. Instead, we need to synthesize fictions, systems of navigating this space, this universe, that don't entirely make sense and are only marginally aligned with fact and truth, but they get the job done. They're quick fixes in a world where decisions have to be made now. And the better, but our story, those stories, those fictions, another feature of them is that they can change, they can evolve, they can be replaced with better fictions. And that's what we do. As we move through life, we develop our own stories, we remember our own stories, we hear the stories of others. And we use those to synthesize better stories, better rules for living. And as time goes on, we may stop attaching those stories just to ourselves and our friends, but we hear stories of great people who have done great deeds. And we latch onto their stories and their successes, and we bring them into our fold. And we start developing heroes from that. And then we develop greater stories that are maybe farther from any actual fact or truth, but closer to that utility of things that we use. And we attach onto those stories, not onto real people who have existed, but maybe people who didn't really exist, or maybe a split, a demigod, if you will, of things that actually happened, stories that actually happened, and stories that never really happened. And we make these people who are larger than life. And eventually, we get into a system where all these heroes become completely separated from anything that actually was. And they go past that state of being demigods to gods. The things that we can aspire to be, that can help us navigate the world by understanding their stories and their narratives, but are nonetheless not based on fact. So from this evolution of stories to heroes, to demigods, to gods, we build up these powerful stories, these powerful fictions for living. And that is what we need to survive. It's not a choice whether you believe in gods or not. It's more a question of you have to look at your behavior, what stories you're following, what are your gods? And the power that you derive from that knowledge, is that you can choose your stories, you can choose your gods. You can choose to synthesize something on your own, or choose something out of the box, if you will, one of the world's great religions, and make that your own, and adopt those stories to be your guide. So in closing, I'm going to say that God is fiction. But God is fiction in a way that should be exalted. Thank you. So
So again, we will have questions at the end. You have little question cards, so if you want to write out questions after each speaker, go ahead and do that, and then you're going to pass it on to the ushers as you complete that. Our next speaker is Rabbi Dr. Bolka. Rabbi Dr. Reuven P. Bolka received his rabbinic ordination from the Rabbi Jacob Joseph Rabbinical Seminary in New York in 1965, and his PhD degree from the University of Ottawa in 1971, concentrating on the logotherapy of Viktor Frankl. He has been the rabbi of Congregation Magzike Hadas in Ottawa since 1967, and he is presently its Rabbi Emeritus. Rabbi Bolka was the host of the TV series In Good Faith from 1970 to 2006. He was a regular columnist with the Ottawa Citizens Ask the Religious Experts feature from 1995 till its conclusion in 2014, and he has authored and or edited more than 35 books. His prolific literary career highlights also include founding the Journal of Psychology and Judaism in 1976. He was host of the weekly CFRA radio call-in program Sunday Night with Rabbi Bolka from 1994 to 2018. He was appointed to the Trillium Gift of Life Networks board on December 1st, 2004, and has been on the board the board chair since 2007. Rabbi Bolka is actively involved in his community. He served as co-president of the Canadian Jewish Congress, its honorary chaplain of the Dominican Command of the Royal Canadian Legion, and a member of the Interfaith Committee on Canadian Military Chaplaincy. He is also deeply involved with many organizations, including the Ottawa Regional Cancer Foundation, the United Way Centre of AMSA Carleton, is founder of the Ottawa Kindness Week and founding president, CEO of Kind Ottawa, Gandaro, as well as being a blood donor 369 times. He was appointed to the Order of Canada in June 2013. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Bolka.
That bio is all fiction. Can you hear me? Yeah. So firstly, my apologies for being a little bit late. I was all set to go to P9, the park, and P9 is closed, so you can't park there. Of course, there are other places that I could have parked around there where it says do not park, but I was afraid that God wouldn't like that. Actually, $350 fine scared me a little bit more than that, but I'm happy that I finally got here, and I only got here because your past president guided me here, otherwise I wouldn't have made it all together. But it's nice to be here. I'm sorry to my colleague who previously, I actually was quite intrigued by the way you gave fiction a reality which I had never even thought of, which is quite fascinating. So I think we could probably come to some sort of a modus operandi together. But let me just share with you, and then we have about a 12-minute. You're here, you chop, right? Okay, very nice. This is very reassuring, and also very scary. You got the guillotine right in front of me.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's go back to something that the previous speaker mentioned, which I agree with 1,000%. And it may sound funny to hear it from a rabbi. God is not a fact. And the reason why I say it is because if it were a fact, if God were a fact and we could prove it, then we would prove God's non-existence. So we may be agreeing maybe for different reasons. If I can have tangible proof of God's existence, i.e. what we've called over the generations an idol, that you bow down and say, this is God, and you bow down to that. Well, the moment I see an idol, I say, well, this doesn't talk, this doesn't move, so how could it be God? Unless you have an idea of an inert God that can't move, but that's sort of like counterintuitive. Why would I pray to a God? I could do better. God can't move, and I'm bowing down. God can't even bow down. So it doesn't make any sense to bow down to an idol, which has less power than I do. So we've always been anti-idolatry throughout our history. Jewish history is somewhat replete with flirtations that the people of Israel had with idolatry, always landed up in disaster. So, I mean, one of the lessons you learn from this is that idols are not God. They can't be God. That includes Michael Jordan and other types of people that are idolized in our generation. You can't reduce God that way and then still think you have a God. Now, if I could prove God's existence, I would by definition then be proving God's non-existence. And one of the interesting principles within Judaism is that God is, as Maimonides says in his 13 principles, God is not corporeal and doesn't even have a corporeal sense, and we can't even fathom God. So, therefore, God cannot be a fact, if by fact we mean something that we can prove, that people see, and therefore say, I got it. It just doesn't work. So, well, if God's not a fact, then what is God? Is it a fiction? Well, it depends what we mean by fiction. But let me go backwards a little bit now, and I hope I'll come to some sort of coherent conclusion. I want to go back to the book that we ascribe to God, namely the Bible. There are many different explanations of what we mean by the Bible being the book of God. But I want to go back right to the very beginning, to what for generations I would have been totally perplexed to try to make a sense out of it, which is as follows. If you follow the story of creation, and by the way, when the Bible says one evening, one morning, one day, that doesn't necessarily mean 24 hours. And I know that somebody who looks at the Bible fundamentally may say, hold it, it says one day, but my argument to you would be, yes, it says one day, but that's before human beings were created. So it's a God day. How do you know how long a God day is? God day could be, for us, gazillions of years. So I never lost an ounce of sleep when a scientist would come up with a proof that the world is millions and gazillions of years old. And people would say to me, hold it a minute, doesn't your Bible say different? Aren't you in the year 5779 of the calendar, so how does that jive with this? It's not a problem. I always take comfort with the sense of Maimonides, who was a great Jewish philosopher. He said, nothing in the reality of our existence can disprove anything about God. In other words, I'm not worried about it. Somebody will come up with a proof. Even if they would prove the eternality of the universe, I could live with it. We'll work it out. We'll make sure that religion and reality are not separate one from the other. But let's go backwards, and basically we'll take yourself back in time, 100 or 200 or 300 years. And you're reading the Bible, and it says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Anybody remember, just take a guess what day that was? Bible-wise, it was the first day, right? So now you say to yourself, okay, so God said, let there be light in the first day. Then, that would mean that the source of light that we are normally accustomed to attribute, which would be the sun, right? That should have been in existence then. It reminds me of the old Helm joke. It said, which is more important, the sun or the moon? So somebody said, you know, it's obvious that the moon is more important. So they said, what's the rationale for this? Well, it's very simple. You see, the sun, it shines, but it's light already anyway, so it's not a big deal. But the moon, it shines in the dark. So therefore the moon is much more important. Now you see the absurdity of it, because we know that the light comes from the sun, right? But the sun was only created the 4th day. So where in heaven's name was there light on the days 1, 2, and 3? And I'm looking back at this and I'm saying, you know, this is really crazy, because if I was living in the 15th, 16th, or 17th century and I would look at it and say, you know, this Bible doesn't make any sense. How can you have the one or the other? And where was the light in the first day? Did you ever wonder about that? It's really crazy. So I can leave you hanging here and say I'm finished. So enter this very funny thing called the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory says that there was a great explosion in the first day. And the light that we're talking about is energy, and that energy existed in the first day. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole Big Bang stuff now. I'm myself not what you call a physicist or anything like that. But it's very clear that what the Bible was referring to, if in fact we incorporate the Big Bang, is the Big Bang was what happened in the first day. And that light that God said, let there be light, that was the ball of energy that started the explosion which created our universe. So what happens now is that religion and science all of a sudden, not being in some sort of a loggerhead against each other, they all of a sudden they shake hands and say, yeah, nice to meet you. Because the biblical account of creation is exactly the way scientists would have it. And it's interesting that in our generation there are some scientists who have actually done a good job of correlating science with the Bible. Now, again, this doesn't prove God's existence, because nothing can prove God's existence. As I go back to say, the moment you prove God's existence, you prove God's non-existence. And that's why we talk about believing in God, not being sure. And belief is much more powerful, because when you believe in something, it's you that's sort of like fueling the reality that you are embracing, as opposed to a fact which is external to you, and you have to somehow or other react to it, but it is there in your face, as opposed to you somehow or other promoting and advancing its reality. So I wouldn't want a world in which God was a fact, because the moment you make God a fact, you make God into an idol. And the moment you make God into an idol, you create idol worship, which destroys the idea of God. It's a sort of paradoxical ring around, you know, that we keep on going on to. How much more time do I have? 5 more minutes. I thought it was going on for half an hour. Okay, so remember that we don't have any quarrel with science. And if science, in fact, it turns out that the reality of the Big Bang, which apparently, from what I understand, is the theory of the hour in terms of explaining the creation of the universe, it turns out that science and the Bible, which I think is the anchor for many, many religions, not all of them, but many, that we're fine with each other. So science and religion get along. And one of the big fictions that I have experienced is the fiction that many of us believe that science and religion are enemies, and that we don't get along with each other, and that one negates the other. It's totally, not only fictitious, but I think totally wrong. And the moment that you tell a person that you have to choose between a religion reality and a scientific reality, anybody who has half a brain is going to tell you, I'll go with the reality of science. It makes more sense, because facts are right in front of me, and facts can be embraced, and facts can be verified, and it makes a lot of sense. But I'd like to go with the idea that religion and science there's no fight. On the contrary. And I think it's good for us and it's good for science, or us meaning religion, because we want a religion that is rooted in something that people can grasp onto without saying you're crazy for thinking this way. And science, by the way, they have a lot of unknowns that they can't fill in. The big unknown is, how do you explain how from nothing became something? I have not yet seen any scientific explanation for that. Which basically means, I mean, a good scientist, and I've spoken to many of them over my time, and will say to you that we can't explain the going, that big leap from zero to something, whatever that something is. There's no logical explanation for it. So it's beyond science. So a good scientist is not necessarily not religious, because a good scientist realizes there's this fundamental gap. How do you get from 0 to 1? And they realize the way to get from it is it's not explainable. But if you're in a religious reality, you basically say, I don't know either. I don't have an explanation how to go from 0 to 1. But that is, as my mother says, it's the ultimate miracle. How do you get from 0 to 1? But when we get from 0 to 1, then from 1 on, the best thing for all of us to do is to say, let's make use of science. Science has done wonderful things for us. And basically, in our time, and I think this may sound like a little bit of a stretch, but in our time it's allowed us to play God in a good way. Because up until the late 20th century, when a person died, they were dead. Now it's not true anymore. Today you can be dead but still alive through organ donation. Science has basically given us the possibility of taking a dead person's heart and putting it into somebody who needs one, who is now able to live. They can do that with kidneys, they can do that with lungs, they can do it with liver, they can do it with so many body parts. So basically what they've done is taken finite reality and they've extended it a little bit. We're all ultimately finite. But the more that we work together with each other and we understand that religion sort of gives us a sense of humility that we don't have all of the answers, and science gives us, in other words, religion will give science the sense of humility. Science will give to religion the wherewithal to do all sorts of things. So we have so many congregants that fill up the synagogues, churches, and mosques who are alive because of science. Whether it's the organ donation science, or it's the chemotherapy science, or what other types of other medical interventions. So my sense to you is saying as follows. God is not fact, God is not fiction, God is all of the above and none of the above, and if you can figure that out, you're pretty good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Wilke. So, just a reminder, if you have questions, write them down. If you've been in a class with me before, you've heard me say this, but I would like you to drive me insane with the number of questions you're going to ask. Fill the whole card, and then you're going to pass it on. If anyone needs a question card, raise your hand and one of the volunteers will bring it over. So don't hold back. If you've already filled out one card, they will pass on some more. So next, it's my privilege to introduce Imam Farhan Iqbal. So Imam Farhan Iqbal is a missionary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. He received his degree in Islamic theology and comparative religions in July 2010 from the Ahmadiyya Institute of Islamic Studies located in Maple, Ontario, Canada. He has served as an imam in Ghana for 6 months and as Imam Beit al-Islam Mosque in Vaughan, Canada for 5 years. He is currently serving as Imam of the Baitan Nazir Mosque, Ottawa, Canada. Imam Farhan has represented the community in various interfaith events has attended radio programs discussing various matters of faith, and is on the podcast The Conviction Project. He has also hosted several live and recorded programs on MTA, Muslim Television Ahmadiyya. He has co-authored 2 books, namely With Love to Muhammad, Sa, the Seal of the Prophets, and Understanding Islam, Dispelling Myths about Jihad, Oppression, and Violence in Islam. Please join me in welcoming Imam Farhan Iqbal.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be on all of you, and good evening. I will start with a recitation. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I will begin my presentation for this evening by showing you the first chapter of the Holy Quran, which has 7 verses. It's the most fundamental passage in the religion of Islam. It is most often recited by Muslims, more than 30 times every single day. Muslims recite this passage, and the translation is, in the name of Allah, which is the name for God, the gracious, the merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the gracious, the merciful, master of the day of judgment. Thee alone do we worship, and Thee alone do we implore for help. Guide us in the right path, the path of those on whom Thou hast bestowed Thy blessings, those who have not incurred Thy displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. When it comes to the topic today, is God fact or fiction? I think one other nuance, in addition to the nuances that we've already added to this question, one other nuance is another question that we can ask, which is, why does it matter? Why should we believe in God at all? Why should that question even be asked? From an Islamic perspective, there are 3 reasons I could come up with for this question. The first reason is that it is part of investigation. People claim that there is a God, so we should respond to that. We should try to understand why they believe that there is a God, and what are the reasons behind this belief. It is claimed that God exists, and we should try to respond, we should try to discover, we should try to understand why people adhere to this belief. The second reason is that it helps investigation. It helps understand our world. When we start this journey of understanding God, as one of the speakers mentioned earlier as well, that even if it is a fiction, it is beautiful, and it is worthy of our attention and our understanding. And it helps progress our understanding of the world and cultures and religions and people living in different parts of the world. And thirdly, it is simply because, from a religious perspective at least, God has presented Himself to us, and we are responding. God is the one who has manifested Himself through religion, at least from a religious perspective. God is the one who is delivering His message to us. He is the one who sent us His messengers, and we are just simply responding to that presentation. So this is a very brief version of the Islamic case to investigate the existence of God. And now, because we have very limited time today, maybe we can have more dialogue after the speeches, but just to give you a brief overview of why Islam tells us to believe in God. What are the reasons? There are many, many reasons. I will just share 3 main basic reasons, but even those reasons, or arguments, we may call them, are just food for thought, really. because we can't really have a detailed conversation. So just as food for thought, I will present 3 reasons which I think are worthy of our understanding, or at least as food for thought for today. The first reason is very simple, really, and that is that God is a being in whom all people have believed, or most people have believed over the centuries, as far as we know. You know, an interesting question someone asked me, because I had a chance to look into Aboriginal faiths some time ago, and an interesting question that came up was, is there any Aboriginal tribe which never believed in God, which was always atheist? And that was an intriguing question, because whichever tribe I came across, whichever nation, Aboriginal nation I came across, because we have to start there, because they are the ones who have been, at least in North America, for tens of thousands of years. All of them have a deity concept, have a concept of a creator. It's a common belief of the Great Spirit, as he is called in all these Aboriginal faiths. So it is not, at least it is very strange. It would be very strange if all those people living in different cultures in different parts of the world believed in a fiction. If all of them in different parts of the world who had no communication with one another believed in a fiction, it would be very strange. So that's one reason the Quran puts it in this way. This is a quotation from the Quran, chapter 35, verse 25. God says, there is no people to whom a warner has not been sent. So the fact that we have Aboriginal groups, the fact that we have tribes in Africa, the fact that we have the Hindus in India, and the fact that we have people in Japan and in China believing in a deity, believing in a God, and the fact that they had no interaction with one another, or very minimal interaction with one another, and yet they believe in God, is what I would see, at least, as an affirmation of this verse from the Quran, where God says that a warner was sent to every nation. So that's one reason, something to think about. The second reason, or argument, is usually called the design argument. The fact that there is so much order in the universe, and things have been created to fulfill the smallest needs of human beings, indicates, at the very least, that there has to be a creator behind this. The Quran states, again, this is from the Quran, which you see on the screen, chapter 7, verses 4 and 5, but it actually starts in verse 2, which is not on the screen, which says, blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he has power over all things, who has created death and life, that he might try you, which of you is best in deeds, and he is the mighty, the most forgiving. And then the verse on the screen, who has created 7 heavens in harmony, no incongruity canst thou see in the creation of the gracious God. Then look again, seest thou any flaw? I look again, and yet again thy sight will only return unto thee, confused and fatigued. So the Quran is arguing really here that when we look at the universe, and when we look at the order in the universe, it is not possible for it to have just come about through chance or chaos. It has to be a creator. It has to be an intelligent, conscious being that drives everything forward. Again, this is food for thought. This is something that indicates the existence of God, and something that should at least compel us to investigate this question. Now, taking cue from this form of reasoning, the third reason, which I feel is the most important reason or argument for the existence of God that Islam presents, is the fact that God is known through the manifestation of his attributes. In Islam, what we have are the names of God, the 99 names of God, or attributes of God. The manifestation of those attributes of God are what tell us that there is a God. Right? And I would agree that there was a nuanced discussion about whether we can really say God is a fact. It's hard to say that, because where's the belief then? Right? We always say we believe in God, right? It's not a mathematical conclusion. It's something that we believe in. But I believe that the manifestations of God, the manifestations of the attributes of God, are facts. That's what I would say. The manifestations of the attributes of God are facts. So I said already that there are 99 names or attributes. I will not go into all those 99 attributes. I will just present 3 of them for discussion, or again, this is just food for thought. In Islam, 3 of the names of God are Al-Aziz, the mighty one; Al-Mujib, the one who listens to prayers; Alimul Ghaib, the one who knows the unseen. These are 3 attributes, 3 names of God that are found in the Holy Quran. So starting with the first one, actually I've gone ahead of this. Starting with the first one, which is Al-Aziz, the mighty one. So to give you an example, God is mighty. How do we know that He's mighty? We know that He is mighty because we see His acts in the lives of prophets. So from the Islamic perspective, we see the acts of God in the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, peace be upon him. In the Quran, God says, كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَأَغْلِبَنَّ أَنَا وَرُسُلِي, which means Allah has decreed, most surely I will prevail, I and my messengers. Verily, Allah is powerful, mighty. On the one hand, we see God is making this promise to Prophet Muhammad that he is mighty, he will make him prevail. On the other hand, we see that Prophet Muhammad was born into a desert, in the middle of nowhere. His father, his mother, both dead. His uncle raises him. He's illiterate. He has no wealth. He has no power. He has no influence. And yet, out of that, he becomes the most powerful man in the world, known at that time. Or at least builds an empire, which is the most powerful empire in the world at that time. So it's impossible, or next to impossible, for someone to have done that solely by saying that God is the one who has helped him reach that status or that power. The second example, as you see on the screen, is that God is Mujib. He's the one who accepts prayers. I believe that the evidence for God, or the reason why most people believe in God, is because they believe that God is listening to their prayers. It's really this attribute which helps people believe in God. So I'll just give you one example from the life of the promised Messiah. I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. It was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, whom we believe to be the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi. So from his life, and he also claimed to be a prophet and had communication with God. In his life, there is the example of many examples of how his prayers were miraculously accepted by God. And again, I'm cutting out all the details. I'm running out of time. So just a very brief version of this story is that once a boy, his name was Abdul Rahim, became seriously ill due to a fever which continued for 2 weeks, and he became so ill that doctors said that he could not survive. And this news was brought to the promised Messiah, and he offered special prayers, and he said, "Oh God, if this is your will, then I intercede for him." Then God said, "Who is it that will intercede with him except by his permission?" The promised Messiah says that this revelation made him tremble, and he was struck with such fear and awe. But then he received the revelation, "Innaka antal majaz," that is, you have permission. So he offered the prayers, and it was accepted. And he came out of his room and he told the people about this. And from that moment on, just when he was told that he's going to recover, from that moment on, he started to recover. Again, a very short, brief version of what the whole story was. And this is one of many stories from his life which show how this attribute of God manifested in his life. The third attribute that you see on the screen is Alimul Ghaib, the one who knows the unseen. It correlates directly to the fact that God knows what human beings cannot know. God knows what human beings cannot know, and that's why when he gives prophecies, to his prophets, and in this case, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we know that it is coming from God. And there are several examples. I'll just skim through the screens, and I can share them later because I've run out of time. There's chapter 41, verse 21 of the Quran, which is talking about fingerprints. There is chapter 30, verse 42, which is talking about pollution. There's chapter 17, verses 1 to 5. It says, "After him we said to the children of Israel, dwell ye in the promised land. And when the time of the promise of the latter days come, we shall bring you together out of various people." It's about the establishment of Israel. Then we have the Quran talking about transport systems, chapter 81, chapter 16. Then we have the Quran talking about the linking of oceans. When the rivers are made to flow into each other, He has made the two bodies of water flow. They will one day meet. The creation of the building of the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, all this is mentioned in the Holy Quran. And there's one prophecy about the future that I'll leave on the screen for you to read. Thank you.
So we move now to the question and answer session. So if you need more question cards, feel free to raise your hand. So your hands are these things. You put them in the air. I'm hoping to be driven insane by the number of questions you ask. So are we ready to collect the questions? Because we do have time. So we're going to collect the questions. We're going to read them over. If you wanted your question directed to a specific person who spoke, try to make sure that's clear to us. So at the top of the card it says name, not your name, but the name of the person you hope to address the question to, please. So if we could have the speakers come up and sit at the front table here, that way if there are specific questions for you, I'll be able to hop over and hand you this.
that's okay, trying to find his identity. So it's like, that's it.
So, are there any more questions yet to come in? Should I take silence as a no? Okay. So we have a number of questions, but we do have time, so let's try. So the first question we'll start with is, what is the difference between the Muslim God and the Christian God? That's not to one of the specific speakers, so perhaps the Reverend and the Imam would be comfortable addressing that.
Again, that question is a little bit difficult to answer specifically because if God is absolute, undefinable, unknowable mystery, then the human beings are responding or engaging with this holy other beyond thought, word, or idea, then is it the same ultimate reality? I suppose it could be. However, there may be some differences in the specific ways that the tradition would articulate or emphasize that encounter with that holy other. The defining difference would be, I would suggest, that for a Christian, God entered into creation as Jesus Christ. That God became human, that human would become God. That wouldn't be that would not be a Muslim way of experiencing what God is. It would seem outrageous, I think, to a Muslim person. I would imagine that God would become a human being. But that would be the particular way that a Christian would do that. In Islam, one of the great beauties of Islam that I love is the experience in the Quran of Jacob seeing the angels bowing. The angels bow to the human. And I would interpret that as the human as this incredible creation gifted with free will, which the angels do not have. In some expressions of Christianity, although we don't have that specific articulation, some might argue that human beings are superior to the angels because they participate through the Holy Eucharist in God's life and are participants in the divine nature in a particular way in communion with God. So anyway, those are splitting hairs. I don't know if that's...
So, Imam Iqbal, any thoughts you'd like to share?
Recently, actually, I had a chance to study this. I think a better question would be, is the God of the Bible the same as the God of the Quran, right? And if you look at the if you look at the concept of God presented in the Bible, it's quite identical to the concept of God in the Quran. And when remember I mentioned that there are 99 attributes or names of God in Islam, and many of them are mentioned in the Quran. Most of them are also either directly or indirectly implied in the Bible as well. So as a Muslim, I don't have any issue accepting the concept of God in the Bible. Now, when it comes to the Christian concept, I think, respectfully, that there is a development that we see as Muslims. When it comes to the God incarnate, for instance, it's not directly mentioned in the Bible. It is an understanding of the text of the New Testament, but it's not directly mentioned the Word incarnate. I haven't seen it. Similarly, the concept of the Trinity, the concept of Jesus being the literal Son of God as opposed to the metaphorical Son of God, that concept is in our opinion, in my opinion, is not in the Bible. So I have no issue understanding Jesus as the Son of God in the metaphorical sense, just like Israel is a son of God, just like other prophets are sons of God. So there's no issue as far as that is concerned. So we would see that as quite identical, quite similar.
Just want to know, should we feel insulted that they didn't ask about the Jewish God?
So next is a question for Rabbi Boka. How would you order these in importance? Understanding, love, wisdom, knowledge, hope, faith, the law.
Do you want to say that again? I have to write it down.
Sure. Shall I just hand you the card?
You can do that. Okay. I don't know. It's like the guy who won his third Super Bowl and they asked him which one did he enjoy more. I don't know how to answer this question. They're all important. Understanding is important, love is important, wisdom is important, knowledge is important, hope is important, faith is important, the law is important. Let's begin. Probably the best answer I can give you is from the famous encounter that someone, it's a Talmudic encounter, someone approached the Jewish sage Hillel and said, "Teach me the law," which was the Bible, on one foot. And obviously challenging him to sort of reduce everything to something tangible or important or whatever, because he found the whole thing very daunting, so many things to know. And he said to him, there's a biblical directive, love your fellow as you would love yourself. The rest, he says, is commentary, go study. So basically his answer, it sort of probably answers this question too, that the most important thing, and we begin with, love your fellow as you love yourself. And I know love is a little bit of one of those nice four-letter words that's easy to embrace, but then when you start scratching and say, what exactly does this mean? But in his understanding, it starts off with something that probably all religions have as a basic fundamental, which is do not harm, do not do anything to anyone, or do to others as you would like done unto yourself. All sorts of different variations of it. But if we believe that every human being was created in godly image, then the most tangible way we can manifest godliness, because you can't embrace God, because God's not tangible, but the most tangible manifestation of God is another human being. So loving other human beings then becomes the most potent way in which we express our religiosity, which may sound a little bit odd, but that's exactly what religion is telling us. And the Bible being the anchor for so many religions, that would be item number one. On the rest, I would say that you have to be wise enough to understand the meaning of it, and the only way you can become wise enough is if you study, that you get the knowledge. And when you have that, you have understanding, from which comes the hope that if everybody else has it, we'll all be good, and we have to have faith that people will embrace this and understand it. And then that's where the law comes in. I would put the law as the very last, because the law has to be anchored in all of those other things that make the law meaningful. So I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you very much. The next question is for Imam Iqbal. I have some confidence that I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, so I'm going to bring it over to Imam.
The question is actually quoting from the Quran. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, which is Arabic. It says, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The question is, does it not tell that all the matter of the universe came from the power of energy of God Himself? I would agree with that, but to argue that from a scientific point of view, that is what is the question. I think that is the implied question, which I'm not qualified to suggest that, how do we prove that everything is coming from light? The respected rabbi mentioned something about the Big Bang and then the energy in the very beginning and the light in the very beginning. That was quite intriguing for me. But to say it in a very scientific way and to establish it as a fact, I'm probably not qualified to do that. But it is a beautiful verse, and what I want to say also is the fact that there are many verses in the Quran that are quite scientific in nature, and they urge us to investigate further. There are many verses in the Quran that actually talks about the people of understanding, or the people of knowledge. So it urges. For instance, there's one verse of the Quran that says that in the transition of day and night, there are signs. Go look for them, O people of understanding. Then there's one verse of the Holy Quran that says that the heavens and the earth go on expanding. It says, Musi'un, go on expanding, which actually sort of affirms the expanding universe concept that we have in science. Again, I'm not the best person to investigate those things. I'm a theologian, but those are very intriguing verses in the Quran. The Quran talks about, for instance, in one place, the sun and the moon are floating until they will die. It talks about that a time period will come and they will die. For Prophet Muhammad to make a statement about the death of the sun and the moon is quite interesting, and it should be investigated.
Good, thank you. The next question is also for you, Imam Iqbal. Could the fulfillment of prophecy be a coincidence and not from God?
It actually begs the question, how far are we going to go and say that is a coincidence? And then the next item comes, and then we say that is also a coincidence. And then an miraculous acceptance of prayer, that incident comes, and we say that's also coincidence. And then another such incident is shared, and we say that is also coincidence. And then we keep on going, and we have to do it thousands of times and keep on saying and suggesting that is coincidence. And then we have to say that all the different parts of the world where religion came and there were people talking about God who had no communication with one another, and they're so similar, and everyone is talking about the same God. From an Islamic perspective, they're all talking about the same God. In their own way, yes. Going back to the example I gave about the Aboriginal peoples, you go to the Iroquois, one of the tribes in the Iroquois will call God Changwa Dizon, and the other tribe, which is Ojibwe, will say Kichi Manito. But they're all talking about the Great Spirit, and they're all talking about the Creator. And then you go to the Australian tribes, and then you go to the so a list goes on. How much are we going? We're talking about belief in God and belief beyond reasonable doubt. Right? So how much doubt it takes a daunting amount of doubt about all those incidents and all those times when prophecies came true. And like I mentioned about the Bible, there are so many prophecies in the Bible, so many prophets talked about the exile before the exile happened. Isaiah was talking about it, Jeremiah was talking about it, other prophets were talking about it. It happened exactly how they said it would happen. And then the return of the Israelites back to the promised land, it happened exactly how it was predicted. And throughout the history, so many things happen. For us to say all of that was coincidence, it takes courage to do that, in my opinion.
So can we pipe in?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just, as I was coming here tonight, I got a call from someone that I knew who made a very interesting comment. this fellow found out that a certain medication that he wanted to have was now going to be affordable through, I don't know, through some new pharmaceutics. And he said, wow, there is a God. So, and it's quite interesting. And I think one of the major problems that we have is that for many people, the existence or non-existence of God is dependent on how their prayers are answered or their wishes are fulfilled. So we have all sorts of evidence historically, and I know I share the same thing with you, but the major problem we have in simple terms is, I prayed that my cancer would leave, but it's still here. So we have instances of miraculous disappearance, but unfortunately, the majority of cases, people's prayers are not answered. And I'm saying this sort of reality. I would always urge people to pray, because I think you can't lose. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have a major problem, which is if it's dependent on whether our prayers are answered, the majority of people will say, I prayed that this should happen and it didn't. So then they come up with the next question, which is, why should I believe? So it's a serious matter. And, we can do it from a historical level, but for most people, religion is very personal. And some or other, I always feel I don't have the answer to that. It's very difficult to answer.
I would say that it's looking at it as coincidence is the wrong approach. Like it can actually be by design that chapters in religious texts have connections to real events. Now, if you are trying to, as I was talking before, bundle in information about the world into something that can actually be useful for people, so that they can actually live their life, and that this book will give them guidance. You're going to actually find that a lot of these passages don't just have like a one-to-one correspondence with a fact about the world, but that a lot of these stories will actually have multiple connections to actual situations. So it's not like this one passage for this one passage in. I mean, I don't have religious text, so I'll lean on the other. Like the story of Abraham, for example. There's all sorts of very powerful themes in there, there's events in that story that will resonate not just with will resonate in ways that will seem prophetic, not just with society, but also with one's individual experience in confronting their faith, confronting God, confronting the ideas of sacrifice.
So the next question is for Xander. How can one ever claim that religion's cause start wars? Is the notion that humans won't use another scapegoat for their personal interests, selfishness, invalid? Or is it specifically religion which causes war?
For an event like a war, you're not going to find one specific cause ever. Events are generally multi-causal, and something that binds people together in any sort of tribal conflict will often be pointed to. So religion, well, as a factor in creating community, can also create tribes, and then those tribes, through their differences, can cause conflict. So in that sense, religion can lead to war by the fact of creating a collective identity. But certainly religion is not the only thing that creates collective identities that we need to be wary about. Is there any part of the question that I missed on that?
No, I think
that covers it.
That addresses it.
Okay.
So this is for Reverend Snaden. You say that God does not make sense in terms of meanings we can ascribe to him. You also say that God is an experience. How can you maintain both of these positions?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. You say that God does not make sense in terms of meanings we can ascribe to him. You also say that God is an experience. How can you maintain both of these positions?
I'm not sure I quite use those particular words. There's a great, in fact, it was Father Thomas Keating quotes, which I believe comes from Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, who says, God's language is silence, and everything else is a bad translation. God is silence, or his language is silence, and everything else, every book, everything else in all creation is just a bad translation of God's isness. So when we think of a Christian description or language that we would use, and remembering too that our traditions, our scriptures, are all born within a cultural traditional identity. So Christian language and the New Testament are all drawing from a Platonic world, a Hellenic world. They're using philosophical categories and the only language that they had available to them to discuss and exchange and engage in trying to make meaning. So there's two kind of categories that we talk about, the cataphatic and the apophatic. So cataphatic is the way of affirmation. So God is like this, God is like light, God is like a big mountain, God is like this. But apophatic would say, no, God is not like those things, the way of negation. God is, okay, he's like light, but God is not like light also. God is not. So it takes us ever more into a term that the fathers of the church would call the luminous darkness. So we search for God in light, but we find God in darkness when we abandon all perceptual categories and enter into that mystery with the wholeness of being, of personhood ourselves. So when we say, I think what you're asking, what you were referring to, what I was saying, is that we, by definition, God remains outside of any category that we can give to him. So this was one of the ways that the Christian church or Christian theology developed in defining itself against the Hellenistic world, where God was a oneness of being, vajedi vajud, which is a term sometimes I would suggest that some Islamic scholarship adopted much of Platonic ways of understanding the idea of the oneness of being of God. But Christians would say, or Christian theology would articulate, that there is a wholeness, a fullness of creation, a oneness of being, but God is outside of that even. And that maintains and preserves God's ultimate freedom and free will. A same freedom and free will he bestows on humanity who are made in the image and likeness of God. So when we say we can attribute words or descriptions to God, it's only to say that, like in the Ten Commandments in the Bible, one of the great ones is, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain." It means that any word we attribute to God, in a sense, is already making an idol. It's already putting God in a box, because God is already outside of that. So when we say, but we can experience God, we can experience God not by naming or putting a definition to God, but in our encounter. And that comes a little bit to the whole concept of the incarnation, that the universe and the world is full of the divinity, points to God, realizes God, maybe even according to the 99 names of God are pointing to, describing God. And we can experience God, or we can experience the footprint of God, the traces of God in that beautiful sunset, when we love someone, when we experience love, when we encounter beauty, when we're drawn out of ourselves, when we hear that beautiful music that is somehow transcends all its component parts. We are somehow experiencing the other, that is beyond and outside any word or thing that we can describe or calculate. So I don't know if that, it is a paradox and a tension. One of the things that Christians say about God is that God is one nature, one God, but three persons. God is one nature, but three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So is God one or three? Well, the answer is yes, we would say. It is a dilemma and a paradox, a tension that we encounter God in that way. I don't know if that.
I think so. So this next question is for Rabbi Volka. What is the role of belief in Judaism? I was under the impression that Judaism was an acts-based religion as opposed to a faith-based religion.
Well, your impression may be right. But I don't know that it's an either or. Firstly, let's begin by saying that I think that Judaism is not a religion, but a way of life that is based on certain fundamentals. So if someone were to say, I believe in God, which basically would see that he's articulating a faith concept, but then goes ahead and cheats and insults and behaves in a non-godly fashion, we would say there's some sort of a disconnect between what we consider to be the godly and that person's behavior. So, in a sense, when these things have to interact, there's a famous statement that, again, it's attributed to God, so I don't have any evidence of its veracity, but it's interesting that it was articulated by the Talmudic sages, in which God says, I wouldn't mind if they would abandon me if at the very least they would observe the law. And that is a nice way of saying, I'd rather you be nice to each other and be atheists than being believers who are nasty people. But of course, that's an either-or situation when you have a choice. But the ultimate choice would be to say that our embrace of humanity and our embrace of moral and ethical principle is grounded in our faith system, and we do what needs to be done and what should be done without anybody watching over us. It doesn't make a difference, because we know this is the way to be, because our faith tells us. So it's really not an either or, it's got to be something that synchronizes one with the other, one reinforces the other and actually enhances. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay, I won't argue.
So the next question is not addressed to any particular one of you, so is it improper for a Christian to love Allah as I love Lord God?
There are many Christians that call God Allah. It's just the Arabic word for God.
And in Jewish it's Elohim, which is same concept.
Okay, good. Now the next one is tricky. Why does God have more names than us? Now if we'd had Hindus here, the list of names would have blown off the chart. But anyway, who would like to handle that one?
So this is an interesting question. The truth of the matter is, when you ask the question, it says, why does God have many names? But it all goes back to the names of God. So it's the ultimate name is God. And the names really are descriptors. So for example, for us, you could do the exact same thing if we were that important. you would have described as he can throw a baseball pretty well, he runs quickly, all sorts of attributes of a human being. We would, let's say, call him, the fast one, the mighty one, the adept one, or whatever. These are describers of God. So when we say name, but I don't want to get too much stuck on the idea of the name, because it all ultimately goes back to the one source. But
yeah, I would agree. And another term that we'd like to use is attributes, characteristics. Those names are just characteristics. They just tell us who God is. So for instance, in the Quran, we have 4 fundamental names or attributes of God, which are found in the very first chapter of the Quran that I showed on the screen as well. And those 4 fundamental attributes are Rabb, Rahman, Rahim, and Malik. Rabb means Lord, Rahman is gracious, Rahim is merciful, and Malik is master. So these are 4 fundamental names of God, and other names of God are related to these names of God.
Interestingly, in the Bible, for example, is referred to God as Rahum, which is the compassionate one. You got other attributes. Yeah. You guys want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and maybe this would sound difficult to some. I think it would be my understanding that for a Muslim, the Quran was, it's written by God, or it's inspired directly through the hand of the Prophet Muhammad, who recited the Quran rather. Whereas a Christian understanding wouldn't have that understanding of the Bible. The Bible emerges out of tradition. Tradition, in a sense, comes first in a way. It's human beings and communities of faith relating and their experience of divine. So they are responding. So the way what we call God is what we call God, not what God calls himself. I mean, human beings are experiencing and narrating their experience of this vast mystery. So they call them different things according to where the people are, not God creating his own set of names. That would be a Christian perspective. Yes.
As you were talking, it reminded me of a biblical encounter where Moses is meeting God for the first time, and he instructs him to go start the redemption from Egypt. And Moses asks God a very interesting question. I'm going to come to them, and they're going to say to me, "What's God's name? What should I say?" Right? And so God's answer is, "I will be what I will be," which is to say, I have no name. I have attributes. Oh, I am who I am. Well, the translation really is, I will be what I will. In other words, take your pick. The answer in the first century is not the same as the answer in the 20th.
So the next question, well, there's 2 questions, but it appears to be from the same individual. But how many religions do we have in the world? Why have we so many religions? I can tell you just in India there are 8 religions. Not if you divide them all up. So there are 2 branches of Jainism, 2 branches of Buddhism, more branches of Hinduism than... If we stay until midnight, I can explain all that to you. But would one of you like to answer that question? How many religions do we have in the world, and why do we have so many religions?
Actually, to add to that, there are 53 nations of Aboriginals in Canada alone. And these nations have different languages, or most of them would have different languages, and then they would have different stories about the creator or the spirits. And so each one of them could be termed religion, quote unquote. And so I mean, like, there are probably hundreds. The real question is why there are so many. And the answer is that the Quran, as I showed on screen as well, it says that for every nation there was a warner. In the other verses of the Quran, they repeat that theme. They say that for every nation there was a guide. And what that means is that before globalization, there was obviously before we all had such good communication and we are all traveling so comfortably and so easily and so conveniently. Before all of this started, people were not moving around as we do, and they were living in their own, even today, there are parts of the world which are untouched by industry and technology, and there are still people living in caves and forests, and in a very ancient style. So not too long ago, people were all over the world, and they were totally isolated from the rest of the world. And God sent messengers to each one of them, and each one of them had, as the respected Reverend mentioned, they had their traditions, they had their understanding. They were given the teachings that were best suited to their environment, right? And that's why we have so many religions, so many traditions in different parts of the world.
So I would say maybe in very simple words, there's one religion and many isms. Does that make sense? One religion based belief in God, and how it tributes out to the various ways are the isms of the religion. But there's only one. Would you agree?
I just would also add that sometimes theology is spoken of as like a big city with many suburbs that grow and grow as society moves and changes, and we hold a tradition or a scripture or whatever our faith is, and we bring to it different questions all the time, depending on where even in our own lives, if you are a religious person, you may have your holy book and you may read the same story 100 times, but depending on where you are in your life, you're going to hear it in a whole new way. So society moves. I mean, history moves forward, thank God. Science moves. People are asking different questions. Look at the whole questions around human sexuality that we're facing now today in secular Western North American society. Well, those questions weren't being asked in first century Palestine or Israel when Jesus or Paul or whoever were walking around. So we bring our questions and to the scriptures at that time, and often charismatic figures or different people will then create a group of people. Yeah, that's the way it is, that's what we think, and everyone gathers around them for a while and it rolls along, and that suburb's created, and then another suburb, and another, and another, and another. And even in Christianity itself, there are so many expressions of Christianity. You could have 50 Christians sitting up here on this panel, and they all would answer questions differently. Same with, there's lots of Muslim communities and lots of Jewish expressions too. We certainly have commonalities, but we all have different perspectives and takes. All the different tarikats of Sufis, and it can be very, very different.
Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that it's and this is something I've struggled with my life, and I've come to the conclusion that it's impossible to be irreligious. And then I say that as a person who considers themselves an atheist. It's because, and that goes to why there are so many religions in the world, is because that it's intrinsic to, it's a requirement of conscious experience of the world as a finite being, encountering this universe of immense complexity. You need to come up, the only way to encounter that, the only way to cope with that is to come up with a system of faith, because you're not going to know everything, and it's impossible to know everything. So you have to move forward through that system of faith, and the commonalities that we see through different religions is because that we are because that ultimately we have a shared human experience, and the religious answers we come up to those experiences will tend to converge down to the same truth of that human experience. So you'll not only see this emergence of religions, but you'll also see a convergence of of similar themes, but you're also, as each human's experience of the world, as we're all different, as we're all exposed to a slightly different environment, you're going to see those variations as well. So you're going to see different sects within large religions, and you're actually going to see mirrors of those sects as well. So you'll see within Buddhism, for example, you'll see sects that appear. So offshoots of Buddhism that look very similar to what we consider in the West mainstream Christianity. And conversely, you'll see mystical forms of Christianity which look very similar to what is considered mainstream Buddhism. And those differences within religions speak to the differences, the common differences between peoples and communities.
Is it okay to make an observation, which I don't remember who first made it. It's always stuck with me that if we argue that the reality of God has to be true because otherwise we wouldn't have it, because there's nothing in the world that is real that we don't have, that we haven't. In other words, once we have an idea of it, it's got to be real. So someone religious pointed this out and I said, okay, but there are atheists around, so atheism must be real. What do you say to that? So the answer he gave was actually quite funny. He said, when a poor man comes to you and says, I need money, if you say at that point in time to say to him, I have money, but I'm a big believer in God and I know that God's going to help you. He said, at that point in time, you have to be an atheist and think that God will not help you and you have to do the helping. So there's room for everyone.
So I think the next question is for everyone on the panel. How did you end up believing in your religion? What convinced you?
It comes back to prayers, and yes, a respected rabbi mentioned earlier that what about those prayers that are not accepted? I would disagree to a certain extent. I would say that if most of our prayers were not accepted, most of us would have been atheists. Most people are religious because of the acceptance of prayers. That is my point of contention or position, that when it comes to prayers, God is listening. One added thing that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community talks about, which is my community, which was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi, is that God is a living God, and our relationship with God can continue and is continuing. God did not speak in the past and is silent, or God did not act in the past, in history, and doesn't act anymore. We believe that God acts, God speaks, God reveals, even today, as He did before. So this relationship with a living God is what my faith has taught me, and the most basic way of communicating with God is through prayer. And God's response, God's active response to prayers, which I've seen in my life. But you know, when we talk about faith, we always present the lives of the prophets. In this case, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then in this day and age, we also present the life of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. So I invite you to study their lives, to see how God acted in their lives and is continuing to act in the lives of people all over the world, and whether that convinces you or not. So this living relationship, it starts with this acceptance of prayers, and then it can advance further, from our perspective at least, to the point where a person can start communicating and talking with God. So this is what, at least as far as my faith is concerned, this is what it is rooted in.
I would just say the experience of my own brokenness, the experience of being loved, even when I totally didn't deserve it. That heartbreaking
opening of love in all its various contexts. I can't prove it to you. I can't say I did a checklist. I can't say, and that experience of love to me is most revealed as the fullness of reality is love. And I find that profoundly encountered in crucified love in Jesus Christ. And I can only describe it as being grasped as a relationship that I can't find, I put in words. Evagrius in the 4th century said, prayer is the absence of thought. Prayer is the absence of thought. So somehow entering into the great vastness of unknowing and surrendering to love is the only way I can try my best to articulate that encounter. And
for me, it was something very different than the love of and the universe of love. It was actually the suffering of life and the suffering of those who surrounded me and the suffering of my own suffering that brought me to my belief, my religious system. And it really was that I noticed, I paid attention to the fact that how people dealt with the suffering, the fact that they're going to die, that life is full of pain, that we don't always get what we want, or we seldom entirely, that bad things happen to good people. That I noticed that people who had faith dealt with this in this state of affairs in a much more resilient fashion than those who did not have faith. And I came to discover that through taking responsibility for the suffering of yourself and others is a source of deep meaning. That is, there's a moment of transformation that comes from that interaction of saying that no, there is suffering in the world, but I've been put here to do something about that. That it's and from that encounter with suffering, from transcending the suffering, from taking responsibility for myself and those around me, there can be meaning.
It's actually a fascinating question. The honest answer to you is I was born into a Jewish family, so I never had a choice. When I grew up and started, contemplating the realities around me, so I didn't have any compelling reason to change. It could be that I was lazy. I don't know. I've asked myself this question many times. In other words, if I had been born into a Christian family, would I have landed up being Jewish? I have no clue. I really don't know. But one thing I do know is that I think in every religion, if we approach it honestly, we'll find areas which really perplex us, and others that inspire us. To me, I've always gotten the greatest inspiration from the Jewish attitude to the afterlife, which is that anyone who is righteous has a toehold on the afterlife. So I like a religion that is so embracing, that says, I don't care what your belief system is, if you're a good person, you make it up to the box seats. So I haven't been convinced to change, which is basically the only answer I can give you.
So
So while I'm very pleased at the number of questions we have, I've been told we're nearly out of time, so we can have one more question. So how did the act of Christ's death liberate mankind from sin? Why is the crucifixion so significant to man?
So can you just say the question one more time?
Yeah. How did the act of Christ's death liberate mankind from sin? Why is the crucifixion so significant? It says man, but let's say humankind.
Well, that's a pretty huge question, you know, in this context. But I would just, how do you answer that in a last wrap-up question here? The idea comes to, again, the Christian ideal or understanding that God became human, that Jesus Christ is God. And God entered into human life and descended into the farthest reaches of suffering and human separation, isolation, death as total isolation. He descended into hell, we say in our creed, into the farthest reaches of suffering and death, out of great love. So God again is great love. And in the icon that we use, Christians also, because of the incarnation, use icons, iconography. The icon of the resurrection is Christ standing over a shattered tomb with all the keys and the doors of hell broken. And he's standing on the tomb. And he's got two people by the wrist dragging up from hell, Adam and Eve. He's dragging up Adam and Eve. So Christ has gone to the depths of the first separation in the story of the garden, when human beings in reflective consciousness turned out of communion with God. And all through the story of the Old Testament, God has been chasing them ever since out of great love to come back. And they keep on breaking their promise, breaking their covenant again and again. So human beings in the end can't return on their own steam. So God plunges into creation, into hell, into death, out of great love, and rescues all separation, all duality, all death, destroys death forever by rising from the dead, and restores the communion of all humanity and all the cosmos once again into harmony, into communion with God. And our journey as Christians is to yield and consent to that free gift of communion and divine life which God offers to all human beings. So even in the early church, they would say, as I said earlier, God became human, that human would become God, that we would become God through a communion of relationship and fellowship that transcends to the end of time in communion with all the saints. So that's what Christian life is in a nutshell, the death and resurrection of Jesus.
I think Gregor had summed it up nicely. I just wanted to say that in the more general theme is not just Christian, but it appears in other religions as well. And again, it goes back to what I was saying about suffering, responsibility, and meaning, where Jesus in this case didn't just take a responsibility for, like, my goal is to take responsibility for getting out of bed on time, but he was taking a responsibility for the entire suffering of man, the isolation, separation of not just of himself, but all of creation and all of his ancestors as well, back to Adam and Eve. So the totality of all suffering. So you can imagine the suffering of all humanity as this bottomless well, and he was taking responsibility for all of that. And in doing so, by descending down and taking that responsibility, there's a transformation that the cross is representative of. it's a transformation into meaning, of that all this suffering can actually become a source of the greatest joy that one can experience, and a great link with God, right? The door to heaven through just embracing that which you most fear, and the suffering of everyone. And it's not, you see these echoes not just in Christianity, but some other examples. Like later mythology is the Holy Grail. It's the same sort of story of what the Knights of the Round Table go to do is they take on responsibility to do something about the suffering of mankind by going out and seeking the Grail. The story of the Fountain of Youth is the same story. They go seeking out the journey itself. The trials of suffering are the way to get to meaning, and the ways to get towards something better.
Okay, so we're a little past 8:30. I was supposed to wrap it up at 8:20. Whoops. So, ladies and gentlemen, people of the human orientation, thank you very much once again for attending the symposium tonight. You are also invited to visit the book stall, which is over here. Speakers are requested to stay around for informal discussions to address further questions after the program. Thank you very much once again for coming, and I'd like to call to the stage the president of the AMSA, AMSA Khan, please. Oh, and one of you had a question about secularism and the need for interfaith dialogues. I will answer that one, so come find me.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to thank everyone who came today. I would also like to recognize the presence of Lily Akabush, president of CUSA, and her team in the audience. Your attendance today shows your open mind and respect for other faiths and perspectives. I would also like to thank the volunteers who worked towards the organization of the event, and a special thanks to the moderator and our distinguished speakers to take time out of their busy schedules. I will now request the president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community's Ottawa West Chapter, Mr. Khamis Salam Al-Ada, and the president of the community's Ottawa East Chapter, Mr. Alimuddin Ahmed, and the Regional Eastern Ontario President, Mr. Ashraf Sayab, to present a token of appreciation to the speakers and the moderator. First of all, we have Dr. Richard Mann as our moderator.
One thing I should have mentioned as moderator, we at Carleton recognize we're on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. So I should have said that first.
Moving on to the speakers, we have Reverend Gregor Snedden. Mr. Alexander Miller. Rabbi Dr. Ruben Volka. Imam Farhan Iqbal.
I didn't get it. I didn't get it.
I welcome all guests to visit the bookstall and exhibition. We're also offering a 1-year free subscription to the Review of Religions magazine on display. I would also request the distinguished guests to leave their feedback forms on their desk for volunteers to collect. Finally, I request Imam Farhan Iqbal to come to the stage and lead us in silent prayer.
So we have a practice of ending our sessions with silent prayer. You're welcome to join us however you feel comfortable. Please join me in silent prayer. Amen. Thank you.